In this episode of the Project Management Podcast, we talk about all the changes that are coming to the Project Management Professional, that's the PMP exam, on the 1st of July 2020. Hello and welcome back to the Project Management Podcast at pm-podcast.com. This is episode 434 and I'm Cornelius Fichtner. It's good to be with you again. As a project management trainer, I have always focused not only on teaching my students how to pass their exams, but also on how to become better at what they are doing. Yes, of course, I want you to pass your exam and become certified, but I always strived to ensure that what I teach helps you to better lead your projects and to deliver them successfully for your stakeholders. And that is why I think that the changes the Project Management Institute, the PMI, is making to the PMP exam on July 1st, 2020 is a good change, even though they could have managed the rollout a bit better. With this update, PMI is moving away from the 5 current and somewhat technical domains and shifts the focus of the exam to test candidates' knowledge and experience in the skills that are necessary to actually lead and manage a project. Specifically, the 3 new domains are people, process, and business environment. But why am I telling you all of this when we have a guest for you who is much more qualified than I am? Sierra Hampton Simmons. Sierra has nearly 2 decades of experience as an expert in certification management and joined PMI in late 2013. Currently, she serves as the portfolio leader and head of certification products. This means that she is responsible for the entire portfolio of certification products, including the PMP exam. So she's the perfect person to discuss both the background and nature of the changes. And you'll even get to hear that PMI is making changes to the type and style of questions that a candidate will see during the exam itself. Well then, let's hear what's coming to the PMP. Hello, Sierra, and welcome back to the Project Management Podcast.
Hi there.
Now, we have done an interview on the changes that are coming to the CAPM exam, but please do remind us, what is your role within PMI?
Okay, I am the portfolio leader for certification products, which means I'm the head of the whole certification products group.
Right, and as we have previously identified, you have the overall responsibility for all the certifications at PMI, correct?
That is correct.
Yeah, and how are you and were you involved in all the changes that are coming to the PMP exam?
Oh, yes. Well, I've been involved with those changes from the very onset, including identifying the research companies we work with and helping pick out the subject matter experts who informed the research, as well as overseeing all of the changes with the staff.
All right. And before we jump into the details here at all, I think it would be helpful for our listeners to understand how 3 PMI publications relate to the PMP exam. And that's, of course, the PMP Examination Content Outline, the PMBOK Guide 6th edition, and the Agile Practice Guide. Would you give us sort of an overview what and how these documents, these publications influence the exam?
Sure. That's a really good question. So one thing to note is the PMP exam is really based solely on the content and the exam content outline. This is a document that outlines each section of the test, which we refer to as domains, as well as the respective task and other content that will be covered in the test. The PMBOK Guide 6th edition, as well as the Agile Practice Guide, are references that are used by the writers of the exam, but they aren't the only references. There are more than 30 in total that we use to write that exam. The exam itself is not based on the content. It's just that we leverage those pieces, those 2 publications, as references when we're writing questions.
Yeah, and I think that is probably a very popular misconception that PMP candidates think all that I have to do is study the PMBOK guide and I'm good to go, because they think the PMP exam tests the PMBOK guide, which is definitely not the case. There's so much more that one needs to know.
Yes, I like to say that people need to have experience in project management, and then they need to prepare using the exam content outline as the main starting place to understand what will be covered.
Yes. Which of these three publications is currently influencing the changes that we will be seeing on the PMP exam?
It is solely the exam content outline.
Okay, and again, the exam content outline, that's basically the specifications that says this is what's going to be on the exam.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
How was the CO developed?
Yes. Well, we developed this in a research practice called the Global Practice Analysis. It is similar to a market research undertaking where you are talking to subject matter experts in the field who actually are project managers, including speaking to them as well as their hiring managers to understand what skills are essential for project managers and what skills are not, what types of principles they need to understand, be it traditional or waterfall or what have you. So we developed that, having some focus groups with these individuals, and then we followed up with a survey across the globe that was actually translated into 5 different languages, where we had well over 2,000 people who responded to give us their input and help us prioritize those items that were indicated as important enough to be included on the test. And from that feedback, that respective feedback, we're able to finalize the actual topics that are included on the test, make sure they're thorough enough, and make sure we have enough content on the topics that are deemed the most important.
And what is the background behind the change? In other words, why is PMI updating the ECO and then changing the exam?
Well, actually, we update the ECO every 3 to 5 years. This is based on us really wanting to make sure that what we include in the PMP exam is relevant. In the past, we have used a process called a role delineation study, which only looked at the role of a project manager by itself. This year, because of the changes that we've seen in the market, we broadened it up a little bit more to talk to their hiring managers, to also understand how things like agile and hybrid are impacting people's roles. And we have included the insight we gained from our research into the test to make sure that project managers are really demonstrating the relevant skills in the jobs that they have.
Mm-hmm. And if I remember correctly, what the term was in the current ECO, you talk about a role delineation study, and the other thing was a job task analysis. Do I remember that correctly?
That is correct. That is correct.
Okay.
Yep. And that is when we have subject experts tell us which tasks they perform in the job, and then we do an analysis to see which ones are most important, which ones are most relevant, which tasks are global. And that is all about us not selecting things that are on the fringe edges of the profession, but things that are germane to most project managers in the world.
So in other words, you're updating the ECO to reflect what it is that we project managers are actually doing.
Absolutely. That's exactly right.
All right. So let's take a look at what will change. So in the exam, when I apply, I have to fill in my experience. Is that changing?
That is not changing. We still will require experience for project managers who want to be candidates for the PMP. However,
Go ahead.
One of the things that we are changing is how you express that experience. So in the past, we used hours. Right now, we realize that that's a little bit difficult to estimate how many hours did I actually spend on this project. So now we're going to move to something a little bit more reasonable in terms of how many years you worked on a project, how many months, those kind of things.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Are the number of required contact hours changing? 35?
No, not at this time.
All right. PMI recently changed the exam vendor from Prometric to Pearson VUE. I don't think that's changing again, right?
No, it is not. Safe to say.
Right. So is the PMBOK guide changing?
No, actually, our team doesn't control the PMBOK guide. So right now, again, all the changes that we're making are based upon the exam and the exam content outline.
All right. And I think my next question is a bit, superfluous. What exactly is changing based on everything we talked about? It's only the ECO that is changing, really, right?
Right. The ECO changes. And because of those changes, we change the types of questions and the topics that might be covered in the exam.
All right. So even in the future, you really should read the PMBOK guide. You probably have to read the Agile Practice Guide as well. But now you really need to take a look at the exam content outline and understand what's in there. So can you give me maybe an example of what a candidate may be asked on the exam today and how maybe that might be in the future?
Sure. So for example, the exam structure is changing quite a bit. If you look at old exam content outlines or things for the current PMP that's in place today, you will see that they are very much so aligned to the sections of the PMBOK, right? So it's very much so a process-generated exam. Right now, we have broken the test. The changes that are coming are going to be broken into 3 areas. So we have a section on people, a section on process, and a section on business environment. So that's one of the major changes. So you'll see more questions on things like soft skills and leading a team, integrating virtual team members into your team, using emotional intelligence to be able to really lead a team in a project. So you'll see stuff like that. But you will also still see things about managing a project using traditional predictive techniques, as well as quite a few questions. More than 50% of the questions are coming from agile or hybrid content.
All right. And just to summarize quickly, the current exam follows the 5 domains: initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, controlling, and closing. And the new ECO, it will be people, process, as well as the business environment, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. So it's really on a very high level. Those are the major changes. You just mentioned agile, right? So yeah, once it comes into effect, half of the exam will represent either agile or hybrid. And I kind of alluded to this a little earlier, since there will be more of this. Does this mean that the candidates should now start reading the Agile Practice Guide?
Yes, I would definitely say that is something that would be a good reference place for people to get more familiar with agile practices.
Right. And frankly, from my perspective as a trainer, even if you are taking the PMP exam before the change, read the Agile Practice Guide. Agile is coming. There's nothing we can do about it. It is a really strong approach, and you will be faced with it. You better learn about it and know about it. All right. But since Agile is going to be on the PMP exam, does that also mean that the PMP exam and the PMI ACP exam, that they will have more overlap?
No, not necessarily. So the ACP exam is really intended for someone who has experience working on an agile team. It's not intended for project managers. The PMP is intended for project managers who have led and directed projects for 3 to 5 years. And what we're really acknowledging is that a project manager may have a lot of things in his toolkit, including agile techniques as well as predictive or traditional techniques. And so our test is just going to reflect that you can use both of those techniques and be very successful as you lead and direct projects. Very different from each other.
Mm-hmm. For the PMI ACP exam, PMI has published a list of reference materials, I believe 11 or 12 books that are mentioned on the website. You said earlier that there are about 30 references. Will PMI publish a list of those reference materials at some point in the future for the PMP exam?
Yes, that is our intention. We will be releasing that soon. And we also intend to do a little bit more than just outlining the number of titles, but actually curating that list for our candidates to say 30% of the questions refer to this as opposed to 10% there or only 1% there, so that people don't feel overwhelmed by that list.
Yeah, I heard from a PMI ACP student. He said, you know what? I can't read all these 12 books. And, that's where training companies come in, right? I'm a PMP trainer. I'm a PMI ACP trainer. We had to read those books. We had to synthesize them, and we had to develop a course based on that. So once PMI publishes those 30 reference materials, there's going to be a lot of reading. And then we have to make sure that the training is appropriate and matches what we have. So today, as we have heard, everything on the PMP exam revolves around the 5 domains. For example, on the application, when candidates submit their experience hours and descriptions, it's based on these 5 domains. In initiating, I did this. In planning, I did this. And once you get the exam report at the end of your exam, you also receive a rating for each of those 5 domains. Will both the application and the exam report go from 5 to 3 domains?
No. So what will happen is on the application, instead of referring to the domains, we're going to generally collect your experience for leading and directing projects holistically. So we won't be breaking it out by domain because, as you can imagine, talking about your experience working with people versus process, it might be a bit awkward for a candidate to try to delineate that for us in an application. So in general, we're going to be speaking about your experience leading and directing projects in that application. And we will also ask for you to indicate if any of those projects use a different methodology like Agile or hybrid. And that will be indicated. However, in the score report, we will still provide data on those 3 domains to show you how you did on the sections that were testing on those topics.
Right, and that absolutely makes sense because the ECO says you will be tested on these 3 domains. Therefore, the report should tell you, well, here's how you did in those 3 domains, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And what about the old domains? So initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, controlling, closing. Are they still relevant as far as the PMP exam is concerned?
Yes, certainly. So as I mentioned before, one of the new domains is process. And in that section is where you will find the items that really reflect to the predictive project management methodology. So you'll find questions there on executing, closing, planning, the whole 9.
Right. And that, again, is what you will have to learn by taking a PMP exam prep course, get those 35 contact hours. And I can actually confirm what you have just said, that much of today's exam is going to be integrated into the new process domain. At least we did a cross mapping between old and new. Mm-hmm. And that is what we have seen, that much of what we teach today is the process domain in the future.
Right.
In the past, PMI, when an exam change happened, sometimes took 4 to 6 weeks after the exam change, during which time the exam takers, they were not immediately told if they had passed or failed the exam. And this short transition period, that allowed PMI to gather data on the new questions, make sure that they are right, calibrate the exam, and just fine-tune things. What's the plan this time in the first few weeks after the exam changes?
That is a terrific question. So for the PMP, what you're talking about is, first of all, is called a pilot exam. And typically in the last 5 years or so, we haven't done a pilot exam for the PMP because we didn't have a need, because the change was not so drastic. But because the change is so drastic in this case, we will be having a pilot exam. And a part of that is just as you described, where people who opt in to take this pilot will have to understand that they won't get their results immediately because we're using their data coupled with the data we receive from the other candidates of the pilot to really understand what we should mark as the passing mark for the exam, what's the passing score, and making sure that the questions, as you've already indicated, are really appropriate. So we'll be doing that fine tuning, if you will. That will happen well before the final operational exam is released, and it will be something that will be for a limited time to a limited audience.
Oh, I see. So once the exam change comes around, the pilot exam will already have happened.
Exactly.
And the people who sign up for the pilot exam, they know I am signing up for the pilot exam. I will not be told my results. And if you sign up for the PMP exam and there is nothing about pilot, I'm taking the real exam. I'm not part of the pilot group.
That's exactly correct. We have to be very clear and assuring that candidates understand what they're signing up for.
And is there some sort of a grace period for those students who are planning to take the exam before the changeover, but then they fail and they can't, take it again before the changeover, so they have to take it afterwards? Will they still be allowed after the changeover to take the exam based on the old ECO?
No. So once we go operational and we change the PMP to reflect the 3 new domains, all candidates will have to be switched. And that is essentially to assure that we're being fair to all candidates. So we can't have on a certain date, 50% of the people taking it on one topic, one set of topics, and the other taking on something else. So we need to really be able to stand behind the brand and really tell the public what people who are passing, what it means that they were tested on this versus something else.
All right. Are there any other formal changes on the exam itself that our listeners should be aware of? For example, the CAPM exam, you're adding 2 new question types there. Is there anything similar coming or something completely different for the PMP exam?
Absolutely. We have been doing some research and innovating all kinds of new question types to be included on the PMP. So similar to the CAPM, we will be adding some drag and drop questions, which allow some matching of topics, especially in those instances where you want to do things like definitional questions where you're asking what something means. But we also have some very exciting questions that will be going to really test out things like the soft skills that are covered in the people section, as well as testing things like agile mindset. And that will be integrating things like animations in the exams themselves so that people can really experience a scenario and tell us how they would respond if they were in that scenario.
And when you say animations, that's like you would see a little movie or something like that as part of the question.
Exactly. That's exactly what I mean.
Interesting. As you said, exciting. That's something to look forward to.
Yeah.
I almost wish I could take the exam again just to see that. Yeah. So what do you think is the biggest misconceptions that candidates may still have about the PMP exam?
One of the biggest things is something we talked about earlier. No matter how many times I say to candidates, hey, you've got to take a look at the exam content outline. People always believe that it's based on the PMBOK guide. And we have to be honest, some of that is our own doing. I mean, the exam content outline today is really aligned to the 5 process groups that you find in the PMBOK guide. So that doesn't help, right? And also, if the PMBOK guide updates and changes their terminology, we, out of courtesy to our candidates, update our exam with the same terminology. But the structure of the exam has always been based on the specifics in the exam content outline. So really changing mindset for people and having them really take a look at that document is really important because it helps you to get a bigger understanding about what is truly being tested. It makes sure that you're effectively using your time when you're preparing for the examination.
Mm-hmm. And I fully agree. No matter how many times I, as a PMP trainer, tell my students, no, it isn't. You have to read the ECO. I'll say it again next week. Yeah. And the week after. Yeah. So it's good that we mentioned it twice in this interview here. So hopefully it will sink in.
Hopefully.
All right. Yeah. Let's also not forget the PMI talent triangle. Can you please tell us what it is and whether it has any influence on the PMP exam at all?
Sure. So the PMI talent triangle was released about 6 years ago. And that talent triangle is primarily leveraged for PMP holders who are trying to renew their certification and collect professional development units, PDUs. They must collect a certain amount about the 3 topics that are covered, which are strategic, leadership, as well as technical skills for project managers. It's been in place, as I said, for about a number of years and only reflects the recertification. However, interesting enough, the 3 domains that were selected for the PMP, people, process, and business environment, in many ways align very closely to what you would find in the talent triangle, where people really aligns very much so to the leadership side. The technical piece is covered in process. And business environment does include a lot of strategic elements to it. It was not planned, but it is just further validation that these are the 3 key areas that hiring organizations need project managers to align their skills and competencies to.
All right. So it has a influence on PMP holders because it's for your future, but for the PMP exam, no influence at all.
No influence, but alignment that shows greater validation.
Right. Mm-hmm. All right. Let's talk a bit about numbers here. How many certified PMPs are there in the world?
That is on and counting every day. But right now, let's say there's well over 900,000 active PMPs in the world.
Wow. And of course, how many are taking the exam daily? And when will we have 1 million? That's got to be the next question. So how many are taking the exam every day?
It really depends. I've heard different stats. On any given day, it could be anywhere from 1 to 2,000 a day. It could be more than that. Sometimes in Asia, we have surges. So I really don't have a good number for you there.
Okay, but it is in the thousands every day.
Yes.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Okay. How does this compare to your other exams or any other exams that are out there in the project management realm?
Well, in our other exams, obviously PMP is our leader. It is the most popular of our portfolio of certification offerings, and has the longest history of all of our certification exams. So it is what it is. I can't really speak to how it compares to, say, our competitors, because all of their numbers are not necessarily public. And they don't deliver in the same kind of realm. But I would say for the style of exam it is, as a professional certification exam that has eligibility that you must go to a test center for, it is pretty impressive. And even in LinkedIn, they said that we have been in the top 3 for the last 10 years. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Any other significant numbers about the PMP exam that we should be aware of and should mention here?
Well, one thing I always like to tout is that we are translated into 14 different languages. And that is very impressive. I think that's leading for most of our competitors as well. So we have 14 languages that are currently being offered for the PMP. And that really helps us to make sure we have the global reach that we have today.
All right. So what are your final recommendations for our listeners who are currently studying to take their PMP exam, be it before or after the change?
Well, the first thing I would say is download the exam content outline. If you're taking the test today or tomorrow, that should be the critical path for you. It should be like one of the first steps you take. The second thing is nothing trumps experience. While it's important for you to get your contact hours and it's important for you to get training, it's really important that when you're sitting in the test seat and you're looking at questions, that you're really thinking about how you would perform in that question, in that scenario, if you were in the job, because that's how we write our questions. So don't forget your experience when you're walking into the test room. And most importantly, I would say that it's really important for people to take a look at our crosswalk, especially if there's a chance that they may take the current exam and then have to take the future one, because that will allow you to see what's net new. We have the crosswalk published today on our website and is available for people to take a look at. So I would really encourage people to do that as well.
All right. Sierra, thank you so much for your time today and talking us through these exciting changes coming to the PMP exam.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Sierra Hampton-Simmons is the portfolio leader and head of certification products at PMI, responsible for the entire portfolio of certifications, including the PMP exam. And that's it. Thank you very much for listening. Please visit pm-podcast.com for show notes, links, transcripts, and PDU information. Our email address is info@pm-podcast.com. And finally, we have this. The brain is the most outstanding organ. It works for 24 hours, 7 days per week, and 365 days a year, starting at your birth right up to the moment when you step into the exam testing center. Until next time.